The Edifice Complex podcast is brought to you by DCM, the Drawing Specialists, Blue Rhythm Commissioning Software, and Sensor Suite, the future of intelligent buildings.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex, the property design and development podcast. Let your hosts Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean keep you up with who is innovating and doing great work, perspective on the adjacent possible, and challenges to the status quo.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex. I'm Robert Bean, your co-host and unofficial mediator, here with my colleague, official agitator, friend, and Yoda of most anything to do with buildings, Mr. Adam Muggleton. Say hello, Sir Yoda.
Hello there, young Yoda, Mandalorian. So, looking forward to this today. Just a little bit of background. Jennifer and I met on LinkedIn over a little backwards and forwards on WELL certification and certifications in general. So I'm pretty sure we're going to get into that. But I'm excited to speak to Jennifer because, I've got a bit of an East Coast attitude, I would say, and Jennifer's got a West Coast approach. So we'll see how that squares itself around.
Yeah, so today's guest's calling card reads Global Sustainability and Wellness Expert Transforming the World. Not just the neighborhood, like not your neighborhood block, but the entire world. We love that. She's a lead fellow, holds certification with WELL, and is a faculty member of the International WELL Building Institute. You're also founder and CEO of a Sustainable Production, which is your current company that's been around for a long time. It's a woman-owned, full-service global sustainability and wellness consulting firm that advocates for creating sustainable and healthy places. So already you're speaking my language and somewhat of Adam's. I think Adam has a heart somewhere in there, Adam.
It's in there, it's lurking around.
So welcome to the show, Jennifer Berthelot-Jelovic. Good to have you on.
Thank you.
Jennifer, you earned a Bachelor of Arts in Social Work, I guess a specialty in psychology from Ohio University, and then you went on to get your master's in Applied Social Sciences from Case Western Reserve University. And that's one of the things that we love about you, taking sort of an adjacent field of study, one that's very important for society. My wife, by the way, had her degrees in social work and psychology, so know a little bit about the field. Your passion, though, for it has turned you into the world of architecture and design. It's earned you a number of awards, including Women in Sustainability Leadership Award, International WELL Building Institute Leadership Recognition Award, USGBC Los Angeles Chapter Leadership Award, and also a Rising Star in Women Making a Difference. I got to know, and I know our guests want to know, what took you to an adjacent field of study and decided to turn that into a passion to transform not the neighborhood, but the world?
Sure. So it's such an interesting story. I grew up a tree-hugging hippie from the start. I was the 14-year-old who was on the board of directors for a homeless nonprofit and was, doing everything I could to help people from a very young age. And got my master's, like you said, my undergrad in social work and psychology, and graduate in social work to run nonprofits. And while I was doing that, my aunt was like, hey, come work on this movie. And so I went and worked on one movie and then worked on a second movie. And I was really burnt out from working in sexual assault and foster care and adoption, two very broken systems in social work, and was really bitter, honestly. And I was like, wait, I can go make money and have fun for a little while. I have this master's ball background. And so I got into the entertainment industry and started working in movies and music for 10 years. And luckily, the person I worked for back in 2006 was building the world's greenest aviation facility. And that became my job. And I said, lead platinum, like, what is this? Why is it my job? And I produce movies and music. And by 2008, we had built the world's first and greenest aviation facility, Hangar 25 in Burbank, California. And it produced so much extra energy that it fueled something like 30 houses in Burbank every year with all the excess energy going back, and just a really phenomenal project. But what we learned back in 2008, when everyone else was closing their doors, was that you could actually do sustainability at traditional cost. You didn't have to mark it up 30 and 40%. So we opened a general contracting firm in 2008, and I went over there and spent 4 years there as their director of sustainability. And we essentially provided sustainability as part of the services that they did in general contracting. So all of their projects could be LEED, and worked on a lot of first projects and the cities, the country, the world. It was a lot of fun. And after 4 years, they came to me and said, we're holding you back. People want to hire you as a consultant and don't need us as a GC. You really should start your own company. And so 10 years ago, I started a sustainable production, and, I expected to be focusing on LEED, but at that same point, the WELL building standard was getting started in the background. And I was lucky enough that they happened to be testing it on all of my projects. And so as such, I started giving them very real feedback. And so I started doing consulting for them early on before it was released. So I've been a part of WELL and the formation of that standard. And that's been a lot of fun and really rewarding. But I joke that I took this long path to get back to really taking care of people. I'm just using buildings and policies and organizations as my means of doing my social work now. And I actually feel successful. I'm like, I'm making a difference, and I see measurable results in saving the world. And I used to do pageants as a kid, and I was literally that pageant girl that was like, I want to save the world. I want world peace. That's what I want. And so, yeah, just focusing on my neighborhood would have never been big enough for me. It's a world view that I'm looking at. I really get that, like, we're all just interconnected. If we're not paying attention to the people on the other side of the world or next door or north or south of us, we're missing the boat. So
I love that sustainability work as social work. I love that analog. That's really cool.
Yeah,
it is. And it's funny because there's the phrase equifinality, many roads lead to Rome. I used to use the term "there's many ways to skin a cat," but cat lovers hate that, so I stopped doing that. But you're right. You think about your passion that you had as a young girl, and then your academics, and then, like a lot of people in that field, you do get burnt out.
Yeah,
it's a tough world, no doubt about it, because you're always dealing with the consequences. And so it's very much a reactive system as opposed to proactive. That's not to say that the world of social work and social sciences doesn't have proactive solutions. It does. But many people, especially those in the trenches, are always working in a reactive world, and the burnout rate can be quite high. And yet you found a way later on to stay engaged and make a difference. That's a cool story, right?
Yeah. It's been fun. It's been a wild ride for sure. But I joke, I'm like, I ended up exactly where I was meant to be. It took a little while. I got some really great experience, had some fun, and met some incredible human beings along the way. And now I get to really love what I do and do what I love and get back and make a difference.
This sustainability as social work, I love that, because there's some great examples there. You sort of reinvented yourself as you've gone along, right? So you've had the days of a 40-year career in one job are over, right? So you're a good example of someone who started somewhere, moved adjacent, reinvented, but somehow it's all still connected and comes back. Because when you I'm a big fan of systems thinking, right? So a system is where you draw the boundary, right? So the sustainability of social work is only about moving that boundary of the system out a bit, right?
Yeah.
The system is. And when you think about social work is really dealing with a reaction to a bad systemic outcome. And sustainability work is very similar, right? It is a reaction to a bad systemic outcome, right? It's a tragedy of the commons. That's the difference in scale, right? Social work is more personal, whereas sustainability is tragedy of the commons. It's a macro issue, right? So you've gone from micro to macro. So I would argue you're still in the same field, actually. I've never thought of it like that. You've taught me something there. I love that.
Great. Yeah.
So
I think that's why WELL has resonated so much for me, right? It's that people-based aspect of, I love sustainability and I love LEED, but it was really lacking the human aspect for me, which is where I had gotten my start. And so I think when WELL was created, I was like, oh, we're focusing on people again, and this is so important. So
let's talk about that, because the problem with words like climate change and sustainability, they're a bit nebulous. People have trouble, like, what is that? because we're in it, it's easier for us to understand it. But I think personally on climate change, that's one of the worst branding exercises in the history of the world. It's actually environmental degradation, right, and resource depletion. If you speak to someone about climate, they think, oh, I can't control that. That's a God-given thing, right? But we can all impact resource depletion, environmental degradation. And that's where I think there's been a mistake made, right? So sustainability exists on that plane as well, right? What is sustainability? So for me, it's about efficiency in building use, reducing the environmental impact of what we do and what we build and how we use the buildings, right? So how is sustainability for you in the context of LEED versus, say, the WELL system?
Sure. So I like to quote Rick Fedrizzi, who created USGBC and LEED, and that his explanation of WELL is that it's the second wave of sustainability.
Right.
And I really like that because to me, I've really watched, when I started in sustainability 15 years ago, or very different as a kid, right, as a member of Greenpeace and PETA and everything I could get my hands on to be an activist for the environment at that age. Really sustainability has broadened, right? Like we know that it used to be, recycle, and then it was recycle, reduce, reuse, all of it, right? And it got bigger and bigger. And then suddenly we were looking at our buildings and our transportation and our waste. And so as we've started to grow what sustainability is, when I look at it, it's equity, right? Like we can't even have sustainability without an equity conversation as the foundation. And that's what our company really looks at. It's equity, sustainability, and wellness, but they're all interconnected. You can't have one without the other. How do you have a healthy planet without healthy people? And how do you have healthy people without a healthy planet? And if there's no equity within there, then none of that really exists in the first place. And so I think that sustainability has grown. I look at resilience, I look at ESG and GRES reporting. All of that now is a part of sustainability. And so I do think, Adam, it's a question of how do you define it now, because it really is a broad term that I think encompasses a lot of different areas because they're all interconnected.
Yeah, they are. And I just, a little sidebar discussion. We've had this with previous guests that when we start talking about things like green and LEED and sustainability, and a lot of these terms have either have lost their meaning or they mean nothing to people.
Yeah.
And when I graduated out of school in 1983, all the things that industry has been promoting the last several years in terms of building design and sustainable design, all that, we were taught that in the late 70s. And so my career has been one of frustration because I've spent, and Adam, you're the same way. I mean, we've spent decades and decades trying to tell people that, what we're doing today is stuff that we learned a long, long time ago. And there's just been this resistance to these fundamental principles. And we're starting to see it. And, when I die, hopefully by then, we won't need to have these special terms and organizations. It will become part of our culture. And that's why, I've stopped using those green and LEED and sustainability. And I think these are all great terms, but ultimately it comes down to earth stewardship. And I like the word earth stewardship because people get that more than they get what green is. Because you can't, I suppose you could bastardize earth stewardship, but there's a meaning to stewardship. What's your reaction to that? Those words and
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think that, because for me, sustainability is so much more than just buildings. And, I'm thinking about the animals, the planet, right? Like I'm a vegetarian of 30 years, I think. Oh, actually, it's 30 years this month. It was April. It was around my mom's birthday when I was 14. So I just gave my age away since my birthday was last month. But yeah, so 30 years ago, vegetarian for me, I've been looking at sustainability holistically and the treatment of all sentient beings, all of that kind of stuff. So I think when you say earth stewardship, it opens it up to a totally different level of like connection to the earth as opposed to products and materials and things. It becomes about people and living beings on a living planet. And I think it creates a visceral attachment as opposed to just sustainability, like you said, which is thrown around in every possible way these days.
Yeah. We had Lloyd Alter on, Adam. I don't know.
Just thinking of him. You must have read my mind.
Yeah. And he triggered some really good thoughts in our conversations, as you have already done in our short time here. But one of the things that he and I started to use it, and that's looking at what percentage of the built environment is actually usable, and what part isn't because of bad indoor environments. And we started to talk about the scale of the problem we have. So you take one office tower in one city block, and that's say that due to bad fenestration systems, bad sound, thermal comfort, all these kinds of things, that you can't use 30% of the floor area, right? One office space, right? Well, then you gross that up. Like right now, I'm downtown. There's a building across from me. It's probably 38 stories tall, right? And I don't know how many hundreds of offices are in there, but you start to think about it, right? Adam, when we talked about this, 30% of one office in one office tower has unusable space because of the design and the construction, the materials of construction, and you gross that up through the entire building, one building on one city block, and how many office towers are like that in a city block, and how many are in the city, and how many cities in the province and in the state, and how many are in the continent, the nation, and then you start to gross it up around the world. You begin to so we want to talk about sustainability and earth stewardship. When 30% of and I'm just throwing that number out, it could be less, it could be more, but the capital resources that are wasted building spaces that we can't occupy, and then you throw in the earth resources that we've raped from the below us and around us to build that unusable space. We need a new metric in the industry, and one that metric should be, what is the percentage of usable space, and start forcing property developers and architects and their associated professionals to understand the costs. We can't, the word sustainability, you use the word equity. Well, there's equity, earth equity, society equity in this waste, and we have to stop that.
Yeah. I think a lot of the carbon, not requirements, but goals that people are putting out there for carbon neutral, they're starting to look at these things. And I think what is really driving the market and is going to drive this a lot is the ESG and GRESB reporting that people are doing. So now that people are reporting their environmental social governance, they're starting to look downstream at their suppliers. And it's really interesting because we're having a ton of clients come to us, and in the last 3 to 6 months, it's been fascinating. We've never had these calls before where they're like, we need a KPI that we can put in place because our investors are asking what we're doing, or, hey, we need to report this up. And even we just responded to this RFP for 4,000 LEED certifications, which was a very large RFP. It also had 4,000 Energy Star certifications as well. And it was very, very aggressive timing. So we responded with what we thought would be a good solution to what they were looking at. But, as we were starting to dive into this and look at it, we started to ask questions about, like, okay, are you doing this for reporting? Are you doing this? And as we were putting together our RFP, what we found was they must be doing a ton of ESG reporting, because all the questions they were asking in an RFP, which didn't used to be there, was, what is your equity? What is your, and it started asking you all of these questions. Are you a B Corp? Do you have WB? Well, the WB and all of that was typically there, but it started to get much more in depth. Yeah, it was like, and it was fascinating to see, that they're now passing that down. And so even as they're looking at people to be hiring as little as a consultant, not that this was a little scope on 4,000 projects, but typically your sustainability or wellness consultant's a very small part of the project, so to speak, right? And so it was just really interesting to see how, I think, Robert, how some of that's going to be driven in how RFPs are going out now for buildings, because it's being reported back up in the investment and in all of that money up front. They're going to want to know, how are you helping us meet all of our reporting and our KPIs and our ESGs that we're reporting? And so I think that that's what's going to start driving that quite a bit.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah. So it's interesting because this conversation, we've really been going from macro to micro all the way, right? So stewardship is a macro thing that can be handled at the individual level, right? So if everybody takes responsibility for it, you get a macro outcome. So I love that. But our industry suffers a little bit from like the word equity. So as soon as you said that, because I'm a money whore, I immediately started thinking stocks and shares. It's the first thing that came in my mind. So equity is one of them words like sustainability. I think all progress and understanding has to begin with a definition, right? So, if equity is part of the next evolution of sustainability, it has to be well defined. Equity as, I don't know, some ratio or formula or KPI, right? That's really where it needs to go for it to connect. Because sometimes you say equity and people like switch off. I immediately go stocks and shares. Some people will just do this, and some people will just go to sleep, and some people get excited, right? And the only way you stop that is to define it. You got to say equity as blah, 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 right? Sustainability for me begins at LEED Gold, right? When I used to, back in the days when I had a firm and we used to do LEED consulting, I'd say, anyone can get LEED Silver if you trip over a bike rack. No one cares about that, right? Bragging begins at LEED Gold. This is years ago. So now you could probably argue bragging begins at LEED Platinum. But the reason you can say that is because there's a definition, LEED Platinum, right? So I'll ask you a question in a minute. What I'm trying to get to is, I understand the LEED system pretty well because I've worked within it. I don't understand the WELL system. So how would you differentiate, say, the WELL certification from the LEED certification? Is it better at these sort of definitions and widening out sustainability?
Yes. So, I would say a few things. To start with, WELL is really lucky, right? They had the thought leadership. So even before the thought leadership from USGBC came over, WELL was, the parent company Delos, before IWBI was created. They sat down and they invited, the Living Future Institute. They invited USGBC. They invited, certain people in the industry that really were leaders and at the forefront of sustainability, right? And they said, okay, what worked with this? What didn't work with this? If you were to do this differently, what would that look like? Yeah. And they really got that information, right? So Rick Fedrizzi could say, this is what we did wrong and what would be better. And Jason McLennan could say, well, if this is what we did, maybe we could have done this, but this really worked. And then I sat at that same table. I was really lucky enough to be at this meeting of the minds in New York back, I think it was in 2014. And I told them as a consultant, this is what works and what doesn't work with both of your systems, and I'm sorry if I'm offending you, but this is someone that's doing the work on the ground and can tell you that this, and this doesn't work, and this, and this does. And so I think what WELL has done from the beginning very, very well, you realize how often you say WELL without being the title of the certification, and ASAP, I say ASAP a lot as well, is that they really listened. So they went to the experts. When they were creating WELL Portfolio, they did the same thing. They spent a year doing an advisory with portfolios of all types around the world, but they also went to everyone who created LEED Volume and said, what worked in LEED Volume and what didn't work in LEED Volume so that we get WELL Portfolio right. So again, they really learned from their mistakes and from their wins, took all of that, and then went out to the experts and have done advisories for everything that they've done. So it's all been super transparent. Anyone can apply to be on the advisories. They're publicly posted and they're global. Right. So you also don't have this experience that, someone's controlling it. It really is a global voice. And their goal is that one rating system can work for every typology, because human health is really based in certain things. So there's, those same few preconditions, but then there's a lot of optimizations to choose your own adventure based on typology, location, all of those types of variables.
So it's like one system to rule them all. How are LEED reacting to the WELL certification? Is there a tension between the two?
I don't think there's a tension because of the fact that they both use GBCI as the third-party verification. So if you're submitting your LEED or WELL certification, it's going to, Green Business Certification, Inc. I don't know how many years it's been, but it still is hard for me to change their name from their previous name in my head. And they really work well together. So something IWBI's done very well is effectively is to create crosswalks. So anything that exists in LEED, whether it's, your glazing, your air quality, WELL has ensured that they're the same thing, or that WELL may go above that, right? They may say, well, that's not rigorous enough, but they ensure that they're using the same standards, the same codes, the same thing if there's an overlap, so that you're not confused as to why. So I think that's really beneficial. I also don't think there's a lot of overlap there. It's a very small area of air quality and daylight that really focus on what you would be looking at as an overlap. And so IWBI has done a lot of work to ensure that they can symbiotically work together and work with all the rating systems globally. So BREEAM, any of them that you could be working with, you'll find those crosswalks that tell you exactly where there's overlap between other rating systems and the well building standard to make it easier. So I don't see a tension. I'm a lead AP and a well AP, and I push both to my clients, and sometimes we do one, sometimes we do the other. Sometimes we create a white glove, specifically for them that's not either certification, but takes, the knowledge and research of both of them.
Jennifer, we've had Jerry Udelson on twice now, I think, Adam.
Yeah.
And I always like Jerry because he tends to come into the conversation with a 2x4.
Yeah.
He in our first interview that we had with him, he mentioned the number of programs, building programs, certification programs around the world. I was shocked. We already knew that there was too many, and that people get paralysis through analysis, and the general person on the street hasn't got a clue what any of this stuff means. Adam, do you remember the number? Well,
I think when he came on, which was over a year ago now, he said there were more than 600 building certifications in the world and climbing. That was before WELL, actually, I think. So it's not a small number.
No. So how do you, in your mind, Jennifer, when you think about over 600 programs around the world and the consequence of that, I mean, that's a monster, a number of documentation and requirements, and now again, that's one of the reasons why I'm so cynical about building programs, having learned the stuff back in the 70s, and now in 4 decades, all I've seen is 600 programs develop, and still we struggle to get people to get the fundamentals right. What's your comment on that?
Yeah, I can say our clients definitely get certification fatigue, overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. Even for us, we do a lot of master planning now, where we're working with 100 acres, 1,000 acres, and it's mixed use, right? It's multifamily, it's everything you could possibly think of, amphitheaters, right? And the clients that are coming to us with these large master plans are also looking at them to be truly sustainable and healthy, right? And so we're coming and pushing back with things not in lead, but really pushing the thought of what these master plans for these communities could look like. And it's a little hard for us to start, honestly, because they've heard about different things and they want to know. And we go through this exercise on each one to figure out, okay, is there, is eco districts better? Is this better? What works? What I've found, especially working with global portfolios, so one of the things that our company is experts in is working globally at scale. The president of our company, John Harrison, spent 12 years at Starbucks and certified 1,600 buildings in the LEED volume program in over 20 countries and all 50 states, right? So, and we've been doing WELL portfolio globally now for a few years as well with some very large clients. And so when we're looking at something, especially at the portfolio level, we're looking for something that is going to work in various typologies. A lot of our clients aren't offices. We tend to get everything but office clients when we're looking at large scale, which is fun. So we're looking at what's going to work across their portfolio in different territories, in different countries. WELL for us, because they did such a great job with portfolio and creating WELL version 2 that was based on existing buildings, so you don't have to do a ton of design and construction work. It's fleshed out as the best to us. It's very transparent. It's very global. They give you all the information. They let you see behind the curtain to everything they're doing. And that's been rare that I've seen with rating systems and standards and certifications, that you get to see everything very transparent, everything cited, all of the data being released, and then having a partner in Delos that's got a lab that's doing testing and putting all of that out very transparently as well. I feel like WELL is something we can trust. We're on so many of the advisories. We see the leadership. IWBI is one of 2 organizations globally, I can say, in the last 30 years that I've been working with nonprofits and organizations that I actually enjoy working with every person I worked with at their company. And I bet I've worked with 100 to 200 different individuals very intimately over the last, as long as IWBI has existed. And some of those people came from Delos before that. So, 9 years now. And that's rare to be able to say that about people. I feel like they really, they're driven by mission and vision. Right. They are very much, right. It's Rick, it's Rachel, it's Judith. It's all these incredible people that come from USGBC with the best of intentions. And I think it's like they've gotten the second shot of really making a go at it and making a difference. And they're getting to do it with people now, through buildings, and they're just doing everything right. It makes it really easy, really usable, really fun, but it's robust. It has testing and measurement and verification in all the right ways. And so for us, we've really stuck to well. And when it comes to sustainability, LEED is what most people in the US are using. Now, when we get to another country, we may be looking at BREEAM or Estidama or whatever that might look like. But some of those are code related, right? Like if you're in the UAE, you're doing Pearl Estidama and that's part of your code compared to whether you're choosing to do BREEAM or if that's a code somewhere else. So a lot of it, I think, is based on location that we're up to 600. I do think in certain areas, you see certain rating systems that are accepted or more predominant. And I do see WELL as the global health and wellness platform that people are using. It's really, really versatile from the health safety rating without testing. That's perfect for COVID. Or if you want to get into certifications with testing, or if you don't want to do certifications, but you want to benchmark, then you have WELL Portfolio as an organization where you can slowly, incrementally, set goals and look at where you're at versus where you want to go across however many projects you may have. And so I think they've made it robust enough, but easy enough that everybody can really jump in and play regardless of where you are or whatever typology you are in. And that's why I think it will surpass LEED. Your question, Adam, earlier is you had mentioned, do I think that WELL will surpass LEED? For two reasons. One, if them. And I do think that, is this frozen or can you hear me?
No, you're back. So it phased out a bit, but you came back.
Okay. Sorry about that. My kids are probably like off school and like playing on games or something right now, using all of our bandwidth. I was like, don't get on right now. So what I was saying is I do think WELL will supersede LEED in volume and numbers. And I think that's for probably 2 or 3 reasons. One, not everyone cares about sustainability, right? It's a fact. Not everybody cares. They don't think it's an issue. They're not willing to put money into it. Second, everybody seems to get health and wellness. They know someone who's had cancer. They know someone who's gotten sick from their house. They know someone with asthma, allergies, all these things. Now that COVID's out there, people really understand that the places where we live, work, learn, play matter, right? It's not just a slogan. It actually meant something. So I think people are more eager to invest in the people when they know that that's 90% of their budget. But looking at how much money are you spending on energy when that's 1% of your annual budget, there's a huge ROI in their people when they start, increasing health and wellness and productivity and absenteeism goes, all those things that we know happen when we improve, health and well-being in a space. So I do think it will supersede. I also think just by sheer numbers, the WELL Portfolio program was created so effectively and efficiently that it's much easier to use than LEED volume is at this point. And until LEED volume can really figure out how to do what WELL has done at the portfolio level, it does limit their ability to grow and scale as rapidly as WELL has with the health safety rating and with WELL Portfolio.
It's interesting. A lot of clients I'm working with in the Middle East at the moment, since LEED went to version 4, there was a 74% drop off. Now, part of that was everyone rushed to get the old one done, right? But there was a 74% drop off worldwide, which is devastating if you're a business. And the other pushback I get from clients, particularly in the Middle East, is the cost of implementing it on new construction, right? So I think WELL did one thing brilliantly, which was the name WELL. You can't argue with that, right? No one's going to argue with that. But what's the cost delta between, say, on a new construction project? If I got a 500,000 square foot office for LEED, just the LEED consulting fees alone are going to be $200,000 maybe. You got to do the energy model, and then all the consequential costs. How does WELL compare to that?
Sure. So I have the experience, and what I've seen from, feedback coming back from around the world and other consultants is WELL tends to be much less expensive than LEED. And it's for a few reasons. You do have all those ancillary LEED costs, right? Your energy model, your commissioning agents, all those things that you may have, as well as the consultants. The consultants are doing a lot of documentation and templates, right? So that's a huge expense. With WELL, you're paying, your registration, your certification, just like you do on LEED. But instead of paying for commissioning and energy modeling, you're paying for performance verification testing, right? And you can hire your own testing agents that are approved by GB. Extraneous costs you have to have beside your consultant. Our consulting fees for WELL are typically less than LEED because there's less work for us to do. We don't have to do as much work, A, because the client can fill out what they have, and B, because the performance testing agent is coming out and verifying. So a lot of times our clients have to check a letter of assurance, which means checking a box, initialing and saying, yes, we did this, because they're going to come out and they're going to third party verify it. Yeah. They just want to know that an MEP or an architect has agreed that, yes, we did this, and you can come out and verify it.
So is there like a percentage? I mean, rough, is it like 20% less, 30%?
So there's less documentation, and it really varies based on square footage because of economies of scale, right? So when it's a under a 20,000 square foot building or project, you may be, looking at a couple of dollars a square foot for registration, certification, testing, and consulting. Whereas when you get up into a larger building, for all of those fees, you could end up at 50 cents a square foot for registration, certification, consultant, testing fees, right? So it really is a very, very scale on that aspect. But when you look at what that's a one-time fee that you're paying for all of those things, and the return on investment from these people all being in a healthy building with healthy policies and procedures, the return on investment or that savings is ongoing with that first, cost that you have up front. So, and then on the architect, MEP, general contracting side, the documentation is way less as well, right? So with LEED, where the GC is dealing with all of the MR and IEQ documentations from subcontractors, right? Although it's a little better with LEED v4 and how we document those credits. In WELL, when we're doing that, it's a lot of saying, yes, we've done this, and they're checking boxes and signing again because they're going to test the VOCs when they come in. They don't need you to document like every VOC that was used on this space or material or product. Instead, you're going to check the box and they'll test it to make sure that it's meeting it. So the general contractor has less to do. The architect's work is different. Instead of doing, the design type of stuff that they would be doing and measurement, et cetera, it's a lot of like very basic answers, signing off on stuff. We as a consultant provide all the sample narratives. So essentially our clients go in and erase the yellow, red stuff and put in their answers on all the documents that are needed if they're needed. There's very few in-depth mechanical, electrical, plumbing type of documentation needed. So the costs seem to be much less of a cost than legal.
Less of a bureaucracy, right?
Jennifer, I want to get into one of the disconnects that I get, and Adam has it as well, as coming from both involved in developing codes and standards, and then also as a practitioner, and then also as an observer of these standards. And I'll give you one example, and that is that over the last 4 decades, I've done research work on design professionals and their competencies in using ASHRAE standards, for example. So both LEED and WELL reference, 62.1, 62.2 in the housing, 55 in the thermal comfort. Well, what I have found, and this has been consistent for 4 decades, is that less than 1.5% of design professionals can actually do a compliance test to ASHRAE 55 thermal comfort. That's you think about the benchmark that is stated within these programs. WELL is one of them, and we had Dr. Nicholas Clement on, who worked within the Mayo Clinic, and so when WELL came along, I was really excited to hear it because of the indoor environmental requirements. But the disconnect between what the standards and certification calls for and what actually is happening in the field is big. when you have, literally, I mean, I remember giving a lecture at the building science camp in Boston, Joe Steebrook and his company, and there were 600, I think it was 600 or 400 of North America's top practitioners in architecture, building, mechanical design, and only 1.5% of them were competent within ASHRAE 55. That has been consistent. I thought that was an anomaly, but it's not. It has maintained that number for many, many decades. And we see that also with air quality. So, in terms of ASHRAE 62.1 and 62.2, and in Canada, we also have a ventilation requirement for residential buildings, CSA F326. Within those standards is a requirement to do source control. Nobody teaches engineers and architects and mechanical contractors and interior designers about source control. We're starting to see it more, but I would, and I've never done the research work to see how many people were competent in doing source control analysis, but I'm guessing it's probably 1.5% too. How do you address what gets promoted in all of these standards, and everybody's waving the flag and it's, great stuff. But when you get down into the trenches, nobody does it. And
so, yeah, I definitely have two answers for that. So the first one is clients do avoid the air and water quality and the testing and the expensive features, right? So the same thing as LEED, when we're looking at points, are people spending a lot of time in air quality or energy? No, because they're really expensive. I mean, sometimes in energy, right? Because you've got your 18 or however many points to choose from, but really a lot of people avoid those unless, some clients are really heavy on energy savings or water savings or whatever it is. And then when it comes to wells, same thing, unless they're really committed for some reason to air quality or to water quality, because we do a great job with the basic water quality just with what's required. But on the air side and thermal comfort side and even sound, I would say those are the ones where people, when they start getting technical, they do the bare minimum. And I was laughing when you asked this because we've been really successful for 15 years. And I don't even need to knock on wood because this one got blown up. But literally had made it 15 years and all of them. And then all of a sudden on a project recently, it was a historical building, and it was a core and shell project inside of a core and shell project and doing well. And I had sat down with them up front, gone through every well feature, what we were doing, all the, standards. And all of a sudden, we asked for them to sign the MEP letter of assurance that says, yes, we've met, 62 or point whatever, right? I can't even think right now, 62.1. 2010, and because I think that's what it was, 62.1 2010 that they were supposed to have signed off on. And they come back and they're like, well, we're not meeting that. And I'm like, wait, what? This is a precondition. We talked about this in our kickoff shred, when we did a page by page turn, and by the way, this is code. I've looked up your code in the city, and then this, how'd you not meet this? And so I can't even tell you how long of a process it was that we had to go through and go back and forth, and thank goodness. So this is what's really interesting is that's not our job, right? To really understand ASHRAE, that's why we have mechanical engineers. It's not a sustainability or wellness consultant. We don't get into that. It specifically says in our agreements, that's very technical. Our insurance doesn't cover that. We don't do that. However, we're lucky enough that, we have someone on our team who is a mechanical, expert and understands this stuff enough to have the conversations and go back and forth. And we ended up having to write an AAP for this project, an alternative adherence, path around testing every quarter, which is extremely expensive. And what happens if you don't pass because there's not the right air, so it's been really interesting on that project to see where they're going and do we continue on with certification or do we just scrap it, knowing this precondition is now going to cost this much money. And it was the first time in 15 years I had come across somebody not meeting. We do a really great job up front of discussing, which codes, which, ASHRAE, this is what you need to meet for this feature, whether it's 55 or 62 or whatever it is. And so I do agree people don't understand it, but we usually work that out in the front. What's interesting is we're finding that owners expect us as a consultant to be able to teach their mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers despite the fact that they're supposed to be the experts and we're the experts in the certifications and telling them what they need to do. So we have become experts in that, and luckily have experts on our team to be able to do that. But it was really hard for those really small consulting, lead well consultants that are a 1 or 2 person show that don't have that kind of expertise. They're not going to be able to provide the services. Clients are really expecting when the MEPs don't know how to do this, and you're now having to teach the MEP how to document and meet an ASHRAE standard that they should have been taught in college, is what my partner tells me over and over as a licensed architect and a mechanical background. So
yeah, it's frightening. I got a magazine here. I don't know where it is, somewhere on my desk, and it was on health and wellness. It was mainly to deal with nutrition and exercise and that kind of stuff. But there was a feature article in there by a well certified architect, and I started reading it, and I just, I need to write the editor, actually, because there was a lot of references that were incorrect and a lot of misleading information. And I know that because I sit on these standards and I know the research work that goes into it. I know how to apply it. And as a practicing engineer, I have to take responsibility, or I had to when I practiced, for these criteria.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Can you find the drawing and supporting documents you need in less than a minute? Now you can with Echo. It's simple. Just type what you're looking for and press enter. Echo knows your building. Speak with a drawing specialist today. Ask about our special offer of painless onboarding plus 6 months free with Echo. Visit podcast.thedsoffer.com. That's podcast.thedsoffer.com.
And now, back to the show.
We know that roughly something like 80% of all buildings in the continent of North America are less than 25,000 square feet. Oftentimes, there's no professional requirement to design these buildings. So what's your comment on, when you talk about LEED, WELL, BREEAM, and all these other ones, they apply to such a small percentage of property development. When you look at the numbers and where we're actually bleeding, it's in this less than 25,000 square foot where there is no or very little professional design requirement, particularly on mechanical and lighting systems, sound systems. So if you look at the 3 complaints, sound, thermal, and lighting, the top 3, what do we do about that percentage that represents most of the buildings on the continent that just will never, ever meet these requirements?
Yeah, it's interesting. We surprisingly get a lot of small projects that go between 4,000 and 25,000 square feet. I think I got 5 new ones today that were all like 30,000. There was one 30,000 and the rest were 20,000 or less, all around the country. And it's hard if they're doing one single one, right? Because there's just no economy of scale. And we're really honest with them. We're like, we're really sorry, but this number isn't going to be pretty until you get to at least 20,000 square feet or more. It's just like it 4,000, 6,000, 10,000 square feet, it's expensive. And so this is where it becomes an equity issue, right? Is it only healthy for the wealthy and only sustainability for the wealthy if we don't have this ability? And I think that's something that, again, IWBI has done really well, is they have a lot of discounts, whether it's for nonprofits, whether it's for small businesses. So even just having like a discount for small businesses, right, is a game changer. If you're a small business, you're probably in a 20,000, 25,000 or smaller square foot space, right? But I think that what we see with a lot of those spaces is that's why you have some more of these ancillary rating systems or standards. So in USGB or in Los Angeles, the USGBC LA has created a Healthy Building Alliance. It's, less than $1,000. I think it might be like $500 or something. Don't quote me on that, but it's 5 simple things you can do in your building, right? So it's looking at air, it's looking at a survey, it's got these few things, and they've got experts that you can reach out to that have been vetted on the page, and certain products or sensors that have been vetted by like IWBI and other people. But it's a way for people to start out without having to put a whole bunch of expenditure. So if you don't have a team, right, because you're a small project, or you don't have, architects, designers, et cetera, MEPs, doing some of these smaller like ratings or certifications or alliances allow you to do that initial benchmarking with someone else saying, hey, we've already done the hard work. Here's the 5 most important things you could start with. And, you're going to pay us for the little, thing that you're going to get at the end to show that you've accomplished something. But more so, we've done all the research and here's what you can do. And you can, go through all of what we're providing for you. And so I think that for a lot of those smaller spaces, that's what we see, or we see more of a white glove approach. So they'll ask us to design into their standards, sustainability and wellness, right? But that's what they're paying us to do, is to design their standards for the architect to then put in all of those attributes that will really make a difference for them, regardless of whether or not they actually get a certification.
Yeah. So one last thing, then Adam, I'll shut up. And I want to illustrate again, and there's a reason for my madness here, and that is I want to illustrate again with one more question about the disconnect between, where WELL is and where your passion lies and what is actually happening in the street. And that has to do with the difference between building codes and standards.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that, if you build the building code, which is the lowest common denominator, before they have to fail you. We've been teaching people for decades that building codes are based on reducing risk of illness, not necessarily for efficiency or comfort or wellness, if you will. So how do you comment on the spread between your passion, what you would like to see, let's just say 100 years from now, you look back on your body of work, influencing the world, transforming the world, and the building codes? How do we get to your vision?
Yeah, ironically, I think that with wellness, human health and wellness, it'll be easier to move the building codes faster than sustainability did, because sustainability isn't having that same impact on human health, right? So when you look at, suddenly we know if you don't do this to your building, there's this risk that's now attached, and person A in your building can sue you because you could have mitigated this and you chose not to. That's going to drive codes faster. So IWBI actually does have a team working with cities and governments to start looking at, right? So they're very much focusing on and working on that, because IWBI knows that working at the single building level isn't going to make the difference we all want to see in our lifetime. We need to be working with portfolios, with cities, with governments, with organizations. That's really where the vast change will be made. And that's why they focus so much on WELL portfolio. And now they have, their communities and cities. And then again, Jason Hartke over there and his team are really focused on how do we get the building, codes changed? How do we get the local governments and cities to start putting this into their local city codes, much like they have with LEED requirements? So I do think we will see this move much more rapidly than sustainability did, because sustainability is already set the precedence of, you can do this, this is why it's important, this is how we do it. But secondly, I think that there's a lot more risk mitigation around human health once you have the knowledge and you choose to do nothing about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think local building code, like the municipal level, is the way to go, because they react faster. The further up the food chain you go, the slower the reaction, the more inertia you meet, right? So, Title 24 is a great example of that in California. That ultimately will probably upward infiltrate to building code, right? So, yeah, I think that's a great strategy. So,
Adam, we had Sahid El-Abar on.
He said that, right? Sahid said that, yeah.
He said that back 2 years ago, I think, when we were talking to him, that change will occur at a local municipal level, not at the grandiose, federal levels, because the federal levels just seem to be reluctant. There's just so much protectionism, cronyism, siloism. Put an ISM on it, and they'll.
It's irritating. But when you think of it, like America and Canada to a large degree as well. So it took till I moved to North America or worked in America, I didn't understand it. Right, I come from the UK. It's a country, right? I come to America. I've come to realize it's like 51 countries stapled together with duct tape, right? So the federal stuff is just so toxic. You've got to get out of there. You've got to accept that ain't working. And it's at the local level where people live and interact every day. That's where the impact is. And then you can export good practice at that point, right? Which is, I guess, the California model in a way, right? We're trying to export that.
Yeah, and that's
standard.
Exactly. And that's what's been so successful here, right? Is California has done it at this local level and really pushed it and made it part of our codes. And because of that, we do less lead work here, maybe because we're already doing it in our codes, which is great. I would like to not have a job because everyone's just doing this naturally and we're not needed anymore. So.
Yep, exactly. I actually want to give a shout out to the West Coast. Not to say that the East Coast of the continent hasn't done, because New York's done some pretty amazing stuff and is going to, they got the boxing gloves on. They're in for, there's going to be some big changes there. But the West Coast, from California all the way up to British Columbia and Canada, have done exactly that. It's been more of a micromanagement of leading the industry. And I want to give a shout out here to Will Malone from BC Housing, because out of all the housing organizations that I've worked with over the last decades, they have started to teach their builders and architects about thermal comfort. And that drives building enclosure design, which improves efficiency and sustainability, all the words, right? But the solution is human-based. Yeah. And if it hadn't been for her and her team understanding the relationship between how we design the enclosure and the architectural features and how that impacts thermal comfort, they would have continued. It would have been situation normal, built to building code, but that's not the strategy that they took. And as a result, they're leading change, just like what's happening in California. So a shout out to the West Coast leadership. And of course, you're part of that. So, yeah.
Absolutely. It was interesting hearing you talk about the, sometimes you're asked to get involved in stuff you shouldn't be involved in, right? Like, for God's sake, can we comply with this code? We've all agreed to comply with it. That's one of the reasons I think, certainly in my business, when I had an M&E design firm, was lead consulting became unprofitable because you get sucked in to incompetence and fixing it, right? So my top tip for you, because I've got the T-shirt on that nightmare you've lived, and I've got the hat as well. When I had the kickoff meeting, I would say to them, not only are you going to write to me a compliance letter, you're going to stamp it with your professional engineer stuff. That gets their attention. And then I do the evil thing of following up and actually asking for it. that took about half of my aggravation away, because then they wound up putting someone senior on the job and my whole life got better. So that's my top tip for you. You're welcome.
That's great. I'll remember that one. Thanks.
The old one I used to do was video the kickoff meeting. So when people get their selective amnesia, you go, hang on a minute, didn't we see this in the kickoff?
That's a good one. That would have helped in this case. Yeah.
Selective amnesia,
Yeah.
So selective amnesia late in the job is just everywhere, right?
It's such a problem in our industry. I don't understand why.
I'm interested. It's just fascinating because, does the world need another certification system? No. What the world probably does need is some of the older ones to die and go away, right? And the newer ones evolve and take it all. That's what we need. We need a Game of Thrones approach here. Maybe, you should get in your dragon and welcome, burn off all the other ones. I don't know. But there needs to be strangely, there's no consolidation. In other industries, you get a consolidation when you get all these players. And I think maybe might be what's coming. You need a Jack Walsh type, maybe at the helm of Well, who says, right, I am going to eviscerate you, Lead and Briam, and I'm going to bring you all into my camp. That's what's needed, I think. Maybe. I don't know. That's my...
Or at least a partnership of some kind where, the biggest ones have come out and they've all partnered. And it's like, okay, if you're doing all of this, it's here as a package, and because some people do want to focus on sustainability or wellness or waste, right? Like they do only want to focus on the little piece that they can manage to start with. And then it hopefully will engage them in other areas as well. But the fact that so many of them don't work together or don't, that there's not a way to easily do all of it. And there's so many competing. So we spend half of our time trying to help clients understand the benefits of, which they would like to do,
Too much choice. The menu's too big. It's like the Cheesecake Factory menu. It takes it a half an hour just to read it, right? It's like too much.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I had to actually hire a bodyguard because of the sacrilege that I always bring to my ASHRAE lectures. And one of them was on sustainability and indoor environmental quality, which one should drive the bus. And the reality is that based on our research work, we know that we can condition people in spaces with 77.5 degrees Fahrenheit plus or minus 22.5 degrees Fahrenheit. That means any temperature lower than the human body can actually be used to condition spaces. And when we get these people, particularly energy modelers and people that are writing sustainability and energy standards, that they could actually delete 80% of the text within the standards, reduce it from being several hundreds of pages down to maybe 10, right? That if you just made one statement that that building shall not use any temperature, 77.5 degrees plus or minus 22.5 degrees Fahrenheit, full stop. Then what happens is it forces the architects and the engineers to work with that temperature range. And then you solve the energy problem and the thermal comfort problem and the lighting problem and the sound problem.
Yeah, but you also explode 20 heads in the meeting room.
Exactly. That's why I needed the bodyguard, because their heads start spinning because it deleted everything that they've been working on for the last 15 years, all of the compliances that they had to go through. They hate me now, but the reality is it can turn their documents into 10 pages long, and then it lets the professionals do what they were educated to do, and that is to apply engineering principles. Fundamentals. Forget the documentation, all of the verbiage, all the text, all that bullshit, and just let them do their job. And well, evidently it's too simple. And so I don't know. I throw that out there because it doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
Sorry,
People definitely make it complicated.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say I agree. People definitely make it complicated. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, we're sort of coming up on time, and we do a couple of quick rapid fire questions. The other reason we were keen to have you on, not just talk about WELL, was that you're a woman in a business that's pretty much just men everywhere, right? Throw a brick any direction, you're going to hit a guy in the head, right? There's just no two ways about it. So, I'm always, as a father of a daughter who's a mechanical engineer, I'm always fascinated by seeing the world through her eyes, right? Because for her, it looks like she has to overcome a lot of things, right? I always say to her, you're not, just be awesome and you will just rise to the top, right? That's it. And that's true, but it's also, she's right as well. Do you know what I mean? There is a infrastructure to overcome, right? A status quo to push through. So I'm interested. Have you found that a real struggle in your career in this business?
It was definitely interesting, coming from the entertainment industry and then into, the design construction industry, which, like you said, was so much men, especially when I got into it, at this point, it's been 15 years. It was more that I looked so young. So at that age, I looked so young that I walked in and they'd be like, who is she and why is she my boss? Are you kidding me? Like, especially because I was like the owner's rep on these big projects and that I was running sustainability. And they were just like, I'd get dirty looks when I was pregnant at 30 because I looked like I was 12. So there was definitely those experiences. And as I got older, it was funny because in recent years, so often I'd be on a site and a guy would be like, okay, honey, watch out for stuff you're on a job site. And I'm like, have you ever been to Africa or Nepal and built with your hands rebar and dog with a basket while the dog's next to you and the woman and the children are barefoot next to you? Because that's the job sites I'm used to working on. So I'm pretty sure I can step over whatever is in my way. My eyes still work despite being a woman. So there definitely was, but I was also really, really lucky to have some incredible men. Some of the first men I worked with in construction were just they took me under their wing. They taught me everything I needed to know. And they were just really lovely human beings and men and mentors in that way. And my bosses, I was just always lucky that, the guys I'd been working with were phenomenal. And so for the most part, it was, I had a few of those people I've dealt with, but I think, even as men, you probably deal with people who are horrible every once in a while as well. But I definitely got the looks for being young and definitely had to prove myself in certain instances. And I can remember specifically with engineers, Robert, you made a comment and it made me think about it. I had this engineer tell me once, he was like, oh, I can't do that. That's going to cost X amount of thousands of dollars. And I was on a call and everyone else was in a room. So 20 some people, the architects, the team, the owners, et cetera. And I was like, actually, if you just go in and hit this drop down, it should take you about 5 minutes and you'll have exactly what I'm asking for in your program. And that should cost me 5 minutes of your time, not what you just quoted at a they figure, and literally it was silence. And people after the call were just like, I didn't even know what to do or say. And I was like, yeah, because he took me as some young woman who had no idea what his engineering systems were, but like, I knew exactly what I was asking for in a report in his system. And so, yeah, you definitely find yourselves having to call people out or put them in their place once in a while. And I don't hold back on that, because it's like, don't take advantage or think I don't know because I'm either young or a woman. And I'm very protective of the women who work for me now that are young. And someone said something the other day, like, she's our project manager. And I was like, she's done 260 health safety ratings, which is almost more than anyone in the world, and probably more sort of like, and I like, you know, and she's like 23 or 24, but she's our main, you know, project manager, and he has more experience than most people in the world. And he literally said, he's like, what did he say? It was something like, well, I've been humbled. Okay, I got it. Like, and he just was like really cool about it after that. But it was like, you know, I could tell she had been put off. And I was like, are you calling into, why did you ask that? Because I stopped talking and said she was your person and I looked 20 years older. So yeah, I definitely call things out in pleasant ways, but sometimes to be
That's right.
You know,
So,
nice to new clients. But yeah, it does happen.
I mean, construction is like an episode of Mad Men always, right? It's just like, but it's about confidence. So my advice, certainly to my daughters, is, you know, be awesome, but also be confident, right? Know when to be humble and know when to speak up. And I think it's the confidence thing that is really the key flipping point in my observations, you know, because trouble with men is, particularly the less they know, the more noisy they are. The emptiest vessels make the loudest noise, you know what I mean? And whenever you see someone squawking and shouting, that's always covering up for incompetence or lack of knowledge, normally, in my opinion, right? And that's where I think women have an advantage over men. They know themselves better. And, it, you know, my advice to any woman, if you're in a meeting and there's some dude like freaking out, know that guy knows nothing and you should be speaking up immediately.
You know, it's great. I'm going back to my website because I talked about this back in 2002, 2004. Back then, Popcorn and Marigold had a book that was doing really well at the time. And, you know, they said things like men and women don't think the same way, don't communicate the same way, don't buy for the same reasons. And when I was studying that whole gender approaches to marketing and real estate and consumer goods, you know, there was a lot of work done that sort of basically suggested, you know what, when it comes to things like health, wellness, spaces that people occupy, men need to get the hell out of the way and let women drive that particular messaging. And one of the ones that came out from another book, Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps, which was pretty funny, but which says a woman knows her child's friends, hopes, dreams, romance, secret fears, and what they're thinking and how they're feeling. Men are vaguely aware of some short people who are also living in the house. And so, right. Yeah, so you know, sort of one of my last questions for you, Jennifer, is that, you know, when you think about the gender, and I mean, this is not new. We've studied this for decades. You know, it's all published. I mean, why do we have such a reluctance to let that gender, the female voice, come through in design? Because it's incredibly important, and we know that. But why so much resistance do you think exists?
Well, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's interesting because I've been looking at a lot of our industry to look at, okay, you know, are there BIPOC people at the top? Why are BIPOC people never speaking at my conferences? Oh, because they're not at the top of their companies. Why did they not get to the top of their companies, right? And I feel like women have made that progression further, where I used to sit in a room and it was all men. Now I'm starting to see a room with, you know, women at the table. I have a lot of women facilities and engineers, which is always shocking when they're like, oh, you're going to talk to Sam. And I'm like, wait, Sam's a woman? This is awesome. Chris is a woman. Like, ironically, on one team with Sam and Chris, and they were both women. And I was like, this is so fun. I love this. I do think women are moving further. I think that women didn't get into the industry, right? This is your math. Like, when you look at the background of classes, it's those STEM classes that little girls were never pushed into. So they didn't rise up, and they didn't make it to that level to then become high enough up, or a partner or a principal at an architectural firm that was predominantly white men, right? At most companies in general. And I think now we're starting to see women, we're starting to see people of color start to move into those positions. But, you know, you go to conferences, it was a lot of white men for a long time. And now in the health and wellness, you see a lot of women. So that really has a lot of women at the top, which is interesting. So John, my partner's like, I'm the only guy on calls these days. I used to be, you know, it was like one woman might be on our call and it was all men. He's like, now I'm like the token white guy on every call. It's so weird. And he loves it, of course. He thinks it's great. But it's really, I think, starting to change a lot in the consulting world, especially, but the health and wellness world. IWBI, I used to joke, I was like, are there any men over there? Every person I worked with has been a woman for the most part. And even in leadership, they have a lot of women in their leadership, which is really exciting as well.
Yeah.
I think a lot of women are starting to move, because there's a time lag, right? You've got to go through the education, your learning phase. So there is a lag between the want and the delivery, right? But I think more and more young women are going into STEM. You have to accept sometimes it's just not an attractive field, right? You either want to do math, hard math, or you don't, right? You know I didn't all the way through university. I did not want to do hard math, right? It's just something I wound up doing. But I think it will change.
And now I've got a 5th grader doing 9th grade algebra. Like I went to open house last night. He's supposed to be in 5th grade. He's in 6th, and he's doing 9th grade algebra. And I'm like, I hope he doesn't ask for help, because there is no way that I'm going to be able to help him with his math anymore. This is like beyond me, you know, and he loves it. He took a math academy. So yeah, it's fascinating to see what people are drawn to.
I wish there was Khan Academy when I was going through my university and college and high school. But you know, going just to close on equity before we get to short fire, equity for me means, and the future I hope to see, certainly for my children, is where equity means if you're good, you're good. It's objective, right? This is why I like the Navy SEAL thing. You can either run 5 miles with a boat on your head, or you can't, right? It's not like, I like you, you're a Navy SEAL. It's, can you do it? Yes or no, right? Can you lead that job? Yes or no? Can you do the math? Yes or no? That's the world where equity exists, right? And then you find out, Margaret Thatcher is a great example, right? She was a woman before her time. They interviewed her, so she was like our Reagan, if you like, right? And they said to her, how, because the Conservative Party was like so male dominated, and she somehow rose to the top, got rid of everyone in her path, and ruled it like Khaleesi for 10 years, right? And they said to her, how did you do that? She said, I was just better than them.
Yep.
And you know what I loved about that? She owned it. It was not, it was just, no, I was better than them. Next question. You know what I mean? That's the world I want for my children and my daughters, right? If they are better than, they will rise to the top. That is equity for me, but that's me.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm fortunate to have participation in a world scientist group. There's about 50 of us. And I would say probably 70% of the members in this group are women. And it's a diverse group of participants. We have epidemiologists, virologists, lawyers, all kinds of healthcare professionals, surgeons, whatever in it. And what I love about it is that the non-building related professional, particularly the healthcare workers, whether it's, the family physician or the school teacher, these are women who are now starting to appreciate what it means to ventilate a building and to filter the air and to have good lighting and sound. So my short, rapid question, having been exposed now to this enlightenment that's occurring within other professions, is let's just say, Jennifer, you're talking to, the graduating class from the Harvard medical community, and you're talking about your passion for the built environment. What do you say to that graduating class of doctors, future doctors?
Sure. What I would say to them is that, their work is much larger than they realize, right? It's not just about medicine, like food, nutrition is medicine, getting natural daylight is medicine. And so as doctors, they're really responsible for educating people and using a holistic way to treat their patients that looks at them, from ways that aren't just like what's wrong with you, but a preventative. Are you eating right? Are you, happy? And looking at the whole human as opposed to just illnesses that they're trying to take care of or symptoms.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, good answer.
My rapid fire question is, this might be a bit unfair. What would you take out of Well or Lead and push into the building code tomorrow if I gave you one option?
Oh, there's so many things I'd want to do. That's really hard. I mean, at this point with COVID, it would just have to be, higher ventilation codes. It would be, raising. Yeah, I think air is just like that. The thing we know that affects every single person in every single building and is one of the things we pay least attention to and is really some of the worst in our buildings. So I would say some air code that's way higher than what it is now that really provides what we need.
Yeah, I agree. I think if people understood how much recirculated air they were sucking in an office or a hotel, they would be horrified. And how badly that was filtered, it is just frightening. That's the problem of knowing how the sausage is made, right?
Yeah.
True enough. But people
vegetarian.
And our listeners need to understand that, the things like this pathogen and the pandemic that's occurring worldwide is forcing organizations like ASHRAE and CIBC to look at our ventilation standards. We did have a higher rate before. It went down due to energy requirements, came back up again. So it has been on a yo-yo, no doubt about it. But there are obviously a lot of professionals looking at this subject matter right now and asking the question, do we have in place now rates and filtration requirements that are going to serve us for the next pandemic that shows up? And we know that's not the case, so we have to make changes. So the listeners need to understand that we're not sitting idle. That's for sure.
We need dedicated outside air, deep recovery. That should be minimum code requirement in my view.
I'm with you on that one for sure.
This is why I am not King of America or on any building code committee.
That's an exercise in frustration for sure.
Okay, look, Jennifer, thank you very much for coming on, because I know we had a little forwards, and I appreciate you engaging with me, and I really appreciate you coming on, and keep doing what you're doing, because really we're all pulling in the same direction here, right? Which is, let's just make things better, because they can certainly get better as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was really fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, when people see us online arguing and are debating, it actually is good stuff. Even the stuff that comes out of Adam's arguments is good. So
it was great. We have this, so it's perfect.
I have a dark heart, but there's also one in there somewhere. Okay,
it's all the better just to bring awareness. So yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Adam, it's time to thank some people who are on our side. Blue Rhythm Commissioning Software.
Blue Rhythm is the commissioning software I've been looking for. Most projects I consult on suffer from poor information and document management. Frankly, it's just chaos out there. Blue Rhythm removes this chaos. It is a secure, always available cloud solution designed to work on any computer, tablet, or smartphone. Their Android and iOS apps allow seamless transition between online and offline work. But what I like most about Blue Rhythm is their painless and fast onboarding process. Their team will bring all your existing forms and checklists into Blue Rhythm for you, or you can use or adapt their pre-built, pre-functional and functional performance test sheet templates. But it's more than that. It enables collaboration, automation, and easy planning and project management for all your projects. Blue Rhythm provides amazing support from a team that really understands your industry. To find out more, go to bluerhythm.com or call country code +1 612 460 8305. Also, you can hear from Blue Rhythm President Andy Martin on episode 26 of the Edifice Complex podcast. Robert, we there yet? I'm bored.
Adam, I know it's hard to believe, but the future has finally arrived in Canada.
How's that then?
Well, smart remote building and equipment management is now available from Sensor Suite.
Go on.
Sensor Suite? Yep. They're an innovator in smart building technology. We like them. They can monitor, control, and optimize anything in your building, saving you time and energy.
You mean Sensor Suite are moving Canadian buildings into the 21st century?
Yeah, I know, another hard thing to believe, but they're doing it and they're saving owners money with efficiency gains.
Okay, I'm in. How do I find out more?
Got to go to sensorsuite.com or call 1-855-773-6767. And also check out the July 2020 episode of the Edifice Complex podcast and listen to Sensor Suite CEO Glenn Spry.
And now, back to the show.
So, Adam, as Jennifer's interview came about, it had to do with you and her having a discussion online. And there was obviously some, commentary that went back and forth that enticed you to invite her. And I'm glad you did. I love her adjacent study and how it's come into the world of architecture and design, property development. And I love her calling card about transforming the world. That's a big statement. I love that, though.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. So I have a gold watch that my grandfather got for 25 years working for the same firm. And I'm going to hand it on to my son. It always goes down to the sons in our family, right? I was thinking, is anyone ever going to work anywhere for 25 years today? Right? It really made me think. And then you look at someone like Jennifer, right? So she starts off, the sunk cost fallacy is I've spent all these years getting these degrees, right? So I'm a social worker, right? Yep. She goes, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to pivot here, right? So the takeaway from that is awesome in that don't get trapped in the sunk cost fallacy. You can reinvent yourself and still use your education, right?
Yeah.
So she found a way to reuse that education. I love that being a social worker. That was a great saying. So sustainability is social work, right? Just take that micro and macro that out to the wide thing. That is great.
If you want to talk about we use the word reframing.
Yeah.
She reframed at a level that is, it's exemplary and it's admirable, and it's got, what she's doing now is she's achieving her love and her passion for the humanities through a path that has a much broader impact. She could have remained a social worker and worked on a case-by-case basis with whatever her field of study was on an individual basis. And maybe in 1 year, she would affect 30 people, 100 people. But in her role now, she's affecting thousands and thousands of people. And all she did was reframe what it was that she was doing.
There's impact there. There's a lesson there about change. There's a lesson there about development and pivoting. There's also a lesson there about impact, right?
Yeah.
So I had this with someone who worked for me. We won the Walmart account, right? And someone came into me and said, "No, I don't want to work for Walmart. They're evil." I said, "Look, if you can convince them just to do something sustainable, and they roll that out to their thousands of stores, do you know what impact that is?"
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about here, right? It's all very well, build the most sustainable townhouse in Toronto, but really no one cares. But if you can shift a super tanker, like Walmart, into something more energy efficient, that is impact at scale, right? And that's really what she's doing. I love that. And the other thing I really liked about Jennifer was we really sort of got into it backwards and forwards in a bit of an argument. So to be fair, I picked on her a bit because she was there and I was having a bad day. And I sort of started. That's who I am. I'm a bit dark. And
that's why you're the official agitator.
Yeah. And she came back at me. But the thing is, right, and this is why I don't like politics today. We are probably on opposite ends of a spectrum, yet we managed to have a discussion and come together. And really, we're really going in the same direction. We just got slightly different takes on things, right? And different lived experiences. And the point is, there's two people here who are opposite ends of a lived experience, managed to come together, have a productive conversation, agree on certain things, right? That's what you need. That's how progress is made. So after one of the things I came away with for this interview was we're all pulling in the same direction, right? Just I have a few ticks about certain things. You have a few ticks about certain things. And she has a perspective on things, right? But they're all going in a better direction than we are, right? That's that. I'm getting weird, but
the word that brought you two together was equity. Ultimately, it was equity, and in your terms of, for you in terms of the financial equity, and her in terms of the humanity equity. But in the big scheme of things, it's the same word.
Yeah,
you can't have equity in the humanities without equity in the financial world, and you can't have equity in the financial world without equity in the humanities. And there's injustices in both. There's no doubt about it. I mean, that's a the path that travels down has boundaries that shifts back and forth. But ultimately, you need both. Otherwise, we lose our identity as a race. If you just had equity purely on the financial side, there'll be suffering and there'll be consequences, because the parasitic loss on the financial side will become a huge part of your day-to-day worries. It'll manifest itself in things like bills aren't getting paid, people are getting sick, medical systems are stressed out, buildings aren't getting maintained, so then taxes will have to go up, and that's going to have an impact on the finances, right? But if you shift that equity to the humanities side, then education becomes important, personal health becomes important, raising healthy, well-adjusted individuals to contribute to societies becomes important. So equity to me seems to be the word that brought you two people together from opposite ends of the spectrum.
Is a bit like sustainability. It's one of the trigger words that it will immediately turn 40% of people off, right? So this is why it needs defining and discussion. So if you think about cities and countries, right, they're systems. And in that system, there's people, there's assets, there's energy use, there's environmental use, there's equity, right? And it's how you balance these things out so that they give the biggest, broadest benefit to everybody, right? That's for me, equity, but it's complex, right? So at one end, you got equity or sustainability, and half people just go, "Oh, please stop talking about that," right? And to be honest, I'm a little bit in that game. But if you start defining it as people and systems, and this is what it means, that's where you get the impact, right? It's how this. I'm telling you, man, this is a Madison Avenue advertising problem. Climate change, sustainability, equity. We need to get the top marketing people on this and redefine them so that people can relate to them. Right? Because when you keep them at that sort of esoteric level, it gives people the excuse to check out on them. Climate change, I can't affect that. So I check out, right? Right? But you can stop chucking plastic in the sea.
Well, it's the same thing as where there's exergy. We've talked about exergy in the past in terms of energy systems, right? But there's exergy in financial systems. There's exergy in social systems.
Yes.
So that word, could travel into any field of study that you want to talk about, just like equity can. But you're right. The esoteric meaning of some of these terms, people it'll just, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to talk about it. Right. But
it gives an excuse, right? So I've watched this documentary on Netflix about the sea and how horrifically bad we have been with it, because it's hidden and you can't see what's going on. You don't know. So it's full of plastic, as a source of protein, it's going away. I think Kamala Harris was talking the other day about future water wars. This is where it's all going, right? And because it's hidden, people can check out. If you use soft, squidgy words like sustainability, people can check out, right? But if you say to someone, we as a country, municipality, we're going to monitor how much plastic and rubbish we chuck in the sea, right? And we're going to publish that every week. And we're going to make you look at a video, an image of that at the end of the news every night. You see how soon people change, right? Because there's an accountability when it's in your face. If you can see how much rubbish we chuck in the sea, it's just nuts. But, it's a game theory comes in here. Tragedy of the commons, right? It's everybody's and nobody's problem at the same time. Yeah. So it's everybody's problem because we've got plastic in our food chain with fish, right? But it ain't my problem because I am not live this near the sea and I don't chuck stuff in the sea directly. We all chuck stuff in the sea indirectly, right? So I can switch off. I got an excuse not to be too concerned or not be in action over it, right? I've got it out because it's not in my face. So I know I'm starting to sound like a Greenpeace warrior here, but I'm not. I'm a nutter. I'm not like that. But the fact is, it's going to get. Do we let it get to a point where it gets so bad it's just in everyone's face completely, or do we start trying to be a little bit proactive and define it better, measure it, see it, and do something, right?
Yeah, I like your comment there about publishing the impact, what's actually happening. People need to know that. And there should be no different than like a weather barometer. You look at the weather today, what is our society's impact on our environmental resources? And, I think that's really important. Well, and again, it goes back to it's a cliche, right? But if you can't measure it, that whole statement.
Yeah. So if you don't see it, you can just say, "Oh, not me. I haven't doing me, mate. I sort my rubbish. The garbage guy takes it away. I'm a good boy." Yeah. And that's
both of you and I, are capitalist pigs.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Down inside. But I know myself. I guess it'll be coming up on a decade now, where I was starting to look at my behavior as a citizen of the world, and that's really where my whole Earth stewardship shift came. How am I as a steward of the Earth? And I started to make changes. I still love the contribution that business and economics and finance have in terms of making society stable and not. When you look at where economics and finance has run amok within the hands of one or two people in other nations, the battles, the wars, the pestilence, the sicknesses that occur, the free world as we know it in the developed nations and the capitalistic systems, it has its pros and cons. But I think more and more of us, particularly in the baby boomer, because let's face it, Adam, as a consumer,
we suck.
We suck.
We suck so hard.
We suck really bad. But I think a lot of us have started to realize as we get older in life and we get a little bit more wiser and, we're done collecting things. And I know like when I renovated and sold my house, the stuff that I had in it and the stuff I ended up giving away and throwing away, I don't know.
You didn't need it, right? You haven't missed it. Have you thought about it since? No.
Not a chance. I'm living in that place that's a quarter of the size that I used to, and I still don't use it all, but what I have here, the things that are most important to me, the artwork, my guitars, my music, the pictures of my family, those are the things that matter at the end of the day. And the belongings that we had before in the past, I forgot about them. They mean nothing. Do I miss them? Yeah, maybe some of the things I miss, but really, not really.
We need. I hate using the word reset, but there needs to. The trick here is to provide the incentives and disincentives to mobilize capitalism to solve this problem. Top-down fear doesn't work, right? No. For example, Detroit, right? It's a disaster, right? It's San Francisco is a future Detroit, by the way, right? So, what's the answer? If I was king of America, which I want to be, by the way, my resume is available if you want it. I would say for the next 10 years in Detroit, you can build on a brownfield site tax-free, and all the proceeds from that will be tax-free for 10 years. Go. Greenfield sites, I'm going to tax you to death. But for 10 years in this window on any brownfield site, everything you spend, everything you gain will be tax-free. But you've got to remediate the site, you've got to develop it, right?
Yeah.
That's one way. That's an incentive, right? Then capitalism piles in and hopefully does it. But I don't know.
And we've talked about this before, and Ireland did that, right? Made incentives for corporations to come and set up shop. And I got to tell you, for those that are listening, you have any political will, political influence, or you want to look at attracting capital, there are examples around the world, and Ireland did a marvelous job of taking revenues from one location and shifting it to another, and now they're benefiting from it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that Donald Trump was saying in code was, I'm angry at Ireland because Apple keep their profits there and don't send them back to America, right? And he was trying to stop that because Apple is registered in Ireland. It's got something like 250 billion in cash. Most of that's offshore, and it ain't going back into America because of the tax rate.
Yeah, and for those that want to,
thanks.
Yeah, I mean, all of this, wah. I got news for you, people. It's a freaking global society. There are no borders when it comes to cash. Cash moves at milliseconds, and it will move wherever opportunity exists. And you can cry a river, and you can blow through boxes and boxes of Kleenex till the cows come home. Wake up.
Yeah.
Your tears aren't going to change dick shit about anything. You got to, and that's important to understand, right?
Yeah, we live in a rules-based world now. In the past, America would have gone there, invaded Ireland, said, stop that, you're ours now. And that'd have been that. But with TV, CNN, and we're all in this rules-based world, you can't do that anymore, right?
Yeah.
So
and as a concrete example, people, for that are listening, Tesla now accepts Bitcoin for payments for their cars.
Yeah.
So screw off with the economics, like trying to control where money flows. As soon as big companies like Tesla start accepting cryptocurrency,
that's a problem for the US. That is a big problem.
You need to wake up and smell the roses. Things are not the way they were in the past, and they're not going to be the way they are in the future. Get over it.
The answer is you've got to somehow assign a value to the environment using blockchain and sort of smart contracts, and then provide incentives and disincentives around it. That's how I do it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, Gezi, when we had Gezi on, right, Paul, and he talked about that whole concept, and we had a couple of other guys on too, and women that talk about the our infrastructure, architectural infrastructure, property development infrastructure as an asset, a collective asset and a resource, and putting value on the exchange of energy and currencies.
Yeah.
It's an interesting area, and I think, you're on top of that more than most people, that we're really starting to see the beginnings of that. You're seeing power, the collective power of our infrastructure as a source of revenues and data, and it's big stuff.
Listen, you're seeing fundamental change here on Steve Fawkes, who came on a little while ago, the UK guy. He says the minute we can monetize energy efficiency, everything will change. And maybe that is done via smart contracts and blockchain. Because then you can financialize it, and then the money arrives. Right? That's where that sits. But it's the early days. We're having some big thoughts here, man. My brain is hurting.
Well, it is, and that and again, for our listeners, we have some really cool things coming up. Panel discussion. I think, Adam, one of the things that we should maybe. One of the panel discussions that were in the planning stage has to do with ethics, but we ought to bring in back guys like Steve Fawkes and Paul Gezi and a couple of other people to talk about economies and property development and
how
monetizing
financialize it. That's a thought. Actually, I'll work on that. Anyway, man, my brain is hurt. We've had some big thoughts here.
We always do, dude.
All right, man. See you on the next one.
All right, see ya. Take care.
Bye.
Cheers.
You've been listening to the Edifice Complex podcast with Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean. To access show notes for this episode, visit edificecomplexpodcast.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. See you next time.